Welcome. You're listening to Literacy Now, the official podcast for the nonprofit organization Parents for Reading Justice, and I am your host, Brett Tingley. We'd like to welcome everyone today. We're very excited to have with us Tracy White Weeden. And I had so much fun looking up your bio because I realized we have a lot in common. You were raised in Michigan. I was raised in Michigan. You have spent a lot of time in Houston, got your PhD in educational leadership, which I think is fascinating. I want to talk more about that in the interview. My kids were all born in Houston. You have been very involved at very high levels with the Houston Independent School District, and for the past 6 years, the president and CEO of Neuhaus Education Center, which is where 7 years. That's amazing. I will make that correction. And really kind of in summation, you have dedicated your life to ensuring that children and adults from every zip code learn to read and are able to participate in this information age and knowledge society. So we cannot thank you enough for your work. But so to kind of kick this off, every time I've listened to many of your presentations throughout the years, and we've talked now a few times, and every single time I learn something new. And so I find you to be very inspirational. But can you share with us a little bit about how you got started in all of this work?
Thank you, Brett. You know, it all goes back to my amazing parents who navigated the war zone of poverty and saw literacy as the way forward for our family. I'm the oldest of 7, and I don't know how Mom saw so much potential in this awkward little caterpillar, but she saw a butterfly, and she saw that butterfly effect in all of the 7 of us. She had struggles with literacy because she had high mobility as a kid. She went to probably 10 different schools. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of trauma, a lot of challenge for her family unit. And her dream was to have a big family. She started off wanting 12 kids and ended up with 7. I think that worked out well. Mm-hmm. And my father struggled with oral language. He had a serious stuttering problem. Same thing, navigating the war zone of poverty, high levels of poverty. Polio that allowed him to have special education services. And actually, I think having polio saved his life because he wanted to run the streets with his friends who had sort of walked away from educational opportunity, but he couldn't. So he was in the library all the time and overcame his impediment by going through a Toastmasters program and then bringing all of those disciplines back to us and having us give all the speeches and learn all the tongue twisters. So those areas of focus, along with my dad ending up becoming an elder in a church and loving the service to widows and the fatherless. That was his passion. He brought us right alongside us in this service-oriented focus. And so I was heading towards radio and television as, you know, I wanted to be in the lights and then I got there and I thought, this is interesting work, but it's not fulfilling that place of service that's in me. And I'd always been a teacher because being the oldest of 7, I was teaching things all the time. Mm-hmm. I ended up coaching cheerleading, loved it, loved young people. And so I had always had this calling to become an educator, but just didn't really realize it till I was a junior in college. And that's when I had the opportunity to pivot and become a certified teacher. And sadly, I was sold a story. I was sold a story when it comes to how to teach kids to read. I did not get evidence-based practices. And so when I actually entered my first high poverty school with kids who were far below grade level, I didn't know how to do any of the things that would be high yield to really move the needle for these kids. Some things instinctively I did because of my literacy privilege. I found it easy to crack the code. I was probably among that 5%, right? Mm-hmm. But many of the children I was trying to serve did not fall within that 5% who learned to read pretty easily. And I was so frustrated that I almost left the profession my fifth year, just like the data shows. A lot of people give up at that point. But I believe there was this invisible hand that said, no, this is your calling. You're not leaving the profession. And then I ended up moving into educational leadership, got my EDD eventually as an aspirational goal. And I realized how crucial it is for educators who are leading the work to know how to support the right work. And then I end up leading in the seventh largest district in the country. Some of the work we did was spot on and aligned, but there were other things like memorizing sight words and sending that work home to parents to reinforce something that was not aligned to teaching kids to decode. Oh my goodness, my do-over are those educators out there who are taking their power back and saying, we will not continue in practices that do not serve educators well and do not serve children well. And so I want to be that champion and ally to educators who I believe in, and to the parents who are part of the grassroots movement that really brought us to the place we are right now, who said, enough. We've got to change. And every child deserves what I call the currency of the 21st century. Reading in the language of power, writing in the language of power, and expressing their unique ideas in the language of power. There's enough room at the table for everyone if we have a clear vision and alignment of all stakeholders to reach for that vision.
Absolutely. But help me understand, and I ask this of all the educators that we interview, if you didn't learn about the science of reading or evidence-based reading instruction in college, where you would think that you would, how did you find it?
You know, I found it in a very interesting way, because when I left leading in an urban district, I worked nationally for Scholastic Achievement Partners, and my focus was on intervention services. So what I saw was this three-tiered pyramid where you have strong first instruction, ideally, right, with intervention at tier 1. The pyramid was upside down, Brett, and the critical mass of children were at tier 2 and tier 3. And I saw this from Compton USD to DC public schools. I saw this in rural districts, in urban districts. I even saw lackluster performance in bedroom communities where children were not, they might be proficient, but they could be performing at advanced levels. I also saw children with dyslexia who were not identified and were not receiving services. And the visceral pain you experience when you're talking to a parent, regardless of zip code, when their kid cannot read. Mm-hmm. Children who have been called lazy, children who have been told you're not trying hard enough. I mean, I told kids, come on, try harder. And it breaks my heart now. I realize some of those children are dyslexic who became adults who are carrying that shame, that pain into their adult years in their relationships. So this is the time for us to come together. It's not about party, Republican or Democrat. It's not about zip code. It's not about the suit we were sent here in. It's about a moral imperative that if we're about nation building and creating opportunity and access for all, this is the defining moment for a literacy crusade. And we need to put our literacy privilege aside and just be real honest about systemic classism and systemic racism. We inherited, but we don't have to accept on our watch. We can choose to care about other people's children. And I say, Brett, I don't care if the kid is white, black, or polka dot. Doesn't matter to me. On my watch, I love children, period. And it's that kind of love and outgoing concern in action. Love is an action word. So that the soccer moms and the moms who are working 3 jobs and the dads all come together around this need for every child to have their greatest human potential unfold. Why can't we be the lighthouse for change for the world instead of having the highest incarceration rates in the world with a direct through line connected to functional illiteracy? That's our moonshot.
And what could be a more worthwhile goal?
When you see people's lives change, at Neuhaus Education Center, we have an adult literacy program where all of our instructors, which is a growing program, and we need more funding for that, all of our instructors are certified academic language therapists. So we take these kids who graduate with a diploma in their hand, and the parents realize they can't read, and they come to our adult literacy program and they learn. So that tells me we could have prevented their failure. We have 70, 80-year-olds coming and learning to read for the first time. But it's such a heavy lift. When the plasticity of the brain is heightened, that's the time to identify and intervene and prevent failure. Why throw kids in an ocean where they're supposed to be learning to swim, right, and become literate, so to speak, that metaphor, and then administer CPR after they have failed? We failed them. We failed the educators when we don't deal with that upstream issue, not only of teacher preparation, but leader preparation.
Mm-hmm.
The most important work any superintendent will scale responsibly is that of literacy. If they don't lay that foundation, opportunity and access is limited to gifted and talented programs, to CTE pathways, all these sexy, exciting things we want to do for kids. But if they can't read, they don't have a place at the table.
Parents for Reading Justice is a nonprofit grassroots movement dedicated to ensuring every child learns to read by engaging parents and educators in adopting the science of teaching reading. Please watch our award-winning film, Our Dyslexic Children, take our master class, and to ensure all our services remain free of charge, please consider making a donation today, all at parentsforreadingjustice.org. Well, and now this brings up, because a lot of parents are becoming aware of this. We are shouting from the rooftops, realize that only a third of the kids in the country are reading, realize that we know how to teach kids how to read, and activate at your district level and then at your state level, and really start bringing this to your districts. But it's an interesting dance that you do with the district, your teacher, then your principal, then your superintendent, saying, because I have my work is in engineering and business. So when I went in and I said, hey, I've been looking on the internet and there's the science of reading, they didn't laugh at me, but they, well, maybe so. What's a good way for a parent to approach an educator to help them discover the science of reading?
The most important thing, I believe, is to help build awareness. And I highly recommend podcasts like Emily Hanford's. Ask them to watch, learn, and then invite them to lunch. Bring them lunch. Sit down and say, I just want to process what your takeaways are. It's the quality of the relationships that we build with people, not shame and blame, that open their hearts to possibilities. That's one thing you can do. If you have built a strong relationship, give them a mental model. Give them an experience. Go visit a classroom within a district where they are doing the right work. At Neuhaus Education Center, if you need a recommendation, we can help you with that. Because if they have an experience, and I'm going to give the example of a philanthropist from Ohio, and this couple actually sent the superintendent and his internal leadership team to Houston to see I call them lighthouse districts and campuses. This was not even a lighthouse district. It was a lighthouse campus that was taken over by TEA and had to perform themselves out of that takeover, and did it through literacy success by scaling the work of literacy responsibly. And when they saw it for themselves, they were blown away, and they said, let's do a pilot. So then they were able to fly in the principal of a school from this district, underperforming for 10 years, the lowest performing school in that district, I think the 8th lowest performing in the state of Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
Sent that principal, who was willing to benefit from something different, eager to, but she said, I've got to get my teachers to buy in. So they flew the teachers for early literacy to do the same thing. One of the kindergarten teachers had her arms folded like this. My kids are doing okay. Why do we need to do this? After she had that experience, she was the one in the principal's ear. We've got to do this. We've got to change. We've got to do. The principal was just cracking up because this person was the fundamentalist who became the believer.
Mm-hmm.
Within a year, Brett, we say it takes 3 to 5 years to really change things. Within a year, they had changed so dramatically. They went to the top 3rd tier of schools in their performance.
Okay.
And that principal now is helping to shape change at the State Department level in terms of policy, because she's done the right work and she is a believer, and her light is shining across that state. That butterfly effect is what you want to create, but we need to inspire. Brett, I say this at so many tables. Some people can receive and some people can't. But we have to create, it's like Simon Sinek says, we start with why. We have to help people understand the stakes. We have to show them the hope for change. We have to build this vision and a appetite for change. And then people won't wait for perfection to step into the arena and say, you know what, let's get bloody, let's roll up our sleeves, let's fight. I want to be a part of this crusade. I see state departments. I sat as an advisor on one, and I said this, but it's like they couldn't hear it. It's the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. We can legislate our butts off, but if we don't create an appetite for change and inspire people to see why this is important, if we do not bring in multiple stakeholders so that they have a place in this conversation and they buy in up front, then we're pushing the boulder uphill versus downhill. That's how we get real momentum. So influence from the middle, you don't need a title to do that. You need a relationship to do that. Leadership is about disposition, not position. And that takes patience. My favorite superintendent I've ever worked with says it's chess, not checkers. And any parent can influence from the middle if they do not step into the space of shame and blame. And that's hard. It's hard. It's also about timing. It's about the right timing. You may have a change where a new superintendent comes in or a new person's over special education. Those are the moments to start to build the relationship with the new person to see if maybe they're ready to benefit and step into the arena with you. But be ready, because when the timing is right, you want to have your strategy in place so that you can activate that strategy.
Well, and we would encourage parents to kind of get together with one another and develop that strategy together and really focus on that strategy. But let me ask you a question that just came to mind. For a parent, you just mentioned how devastating and visceral and primal it is to be afraid that your child may never learn to read and what the implications are for that child in their future. So it's hard to balance that with being very patient and gentle. Stephen Dykstra talks about the urgency.
Yes.
And I really related to that. I don't know. How do you balance that?
That's a great question. How do I balance that? What I do, you have to have a sense of urgency, and you have to speak the truth in love. That means being respectful but direct about what's true. It means giving people experiences any way you can. It means uniting forces with other believers. And the work of Anthony Mohammed really resonates for me right now as I think about that question. When you're managing change, this is change management, you're going to have your believers. Ally yourself with those true believers. Unite forces with them and create that critical mass that you need to create movement. That also allows you to put your oxygen mask on and stay galvanized, right? Then you have your tweeners. They haven't made up their minds yet. Spend some time and energy with those tweeners to see if you can move them over into believers. Those are the ones you want to give experiences to so they can see the possibilities and they want to be a part and get on board with change. Do not spend a moment with fundamentalists, those energy vampires who will try to suck the life out of your sense of urgency. Shake the dust off your feet, walk away from them. At times we're battling the fundamentalists and we're not putting our energy where it needs to be with the believers and the tweeners. That's the key. Find your village, unite forces with them, and then invite other people to be a part of the village. You know, the metaphor for me I love is Stone Soup. The book, as a kid, I just loved that book. And I love it just as much as an adult because the soldiers had a vision to feed themselves and in the process feed the village. And they were not friendly villagers, but they created a vision. They had this pot of stones and water. They had nothing in the pot initially, but when they finished really salting the oats with the villagers, if you will, to say, this is the vision. They started showing up with carrots and beef and cabbage, and they started putting their resources in the pot. Those villagers are business leaders who cannot hire enough people to fill the jobs, and it's tied to functional illiteracy. They can't write well. You know, you hear that from business leaders. Is that your pain point? Come to the village. Let me build your understanding of why this is so. The villagers are philanthropists. If I had enough funding, there's no ceiling on what Neuhaus could do, right? Yeah. The foundations, bring them to the village and bring them to help put their resources in the pot. The parents, you might meet somebody in the grocery store who just says, there's so much tension and stress in my home right now, my kid can't read. That's someone you invite to the village. Educators who have a real heart for kids, invite them and help them understand what's going on. Those are the people you invite. And then they start putting their resources, time, talent, funding together. And then we can nourish the whole community together. That's how we do this work. And it's about who you know. As a business leader, Brett, you starting to elevate the level of discourse around the science of reading. And also making clear that there are different kinds of fundamentalists. So I'll give you an example. This goes back to literacy privilege, and I just have to be very direct about this. There's a knowledge matters movement. Of course, knowledge matters. But if kids can't decode, they can't get to knowledge. We're talking about laying foundational skills. We're talking about evidence-based practices that don't harm any child. And we're talking about systems where the capacity of teachers just to recruit teachers and retain them is very difficult. So let's not make this seismic leap to knowledge matters before we have done due diligence for laying those early literacy skills, early identification of children with dyslexia. Let's not be disingenuous about that. I don't think that's what the intention is. For some of those individuals, they're right. Kids need to be able to speak in the language of power and write in the language of power. But you cannot write in the language of power if you can't spell. If you can't build a sentence, you can't build a paragraph, you can't build an essay, you can't build a life, you can't succeed in college. Not every child will go to college. Some people will want certification pathways. But the complexity of the text required for some CTE pathways is more complex than for universities. Entering the military, you got to pass that test. That is also a placement test. So even if I'm barely proficient, I might get in the door. But in terms of being at high levels in the military, it also screens out those people who didn't have parents who could afford a private tutor or a certified academic language therapist. This is about class privilege, literacy privilege. And so let's be real. Let's not and I have literacy privilege. I can't let that get in the way of the way I see the children in Appalachia, in rural districts, in urban districts who are falling through the cracks. Those are the children who are the most at risk. And justice is about making wrong things right for all children on our watch. And so we cannot pretend away that some of the children who are higher performing are doing it in spite of the system they're in, not because of. My daughter gets private tutoring for math. I can afford to do that for her. My parents couldn't afford to do that for me. And that created a barrier for me in college. Thank God I have a sister who's an engineer who is now deceased, but she was the person who coached me, my younger sister, so that I could succeed in algebra in college. I didn't get foundational skills. I struggled. I had gaps. Same principle. So let's not allow our privilege, our literacy privilege, to blind us to that. And secondly, publishers are giving educators what they're asking for. All right, bottom line, they've got to make money because they've got a board of trustees they have to report to. They got to make money. So if we don't educate ourselves and ask for what we really need, shame on us, not shame on them. So, some of them will create smoke screens and redirect your attention here. Don't look there, look here. Yes, knowledge matters. However, if we're doing 3Qing and we're trying to do science and reading at the same time, absolutely not. Let's strategically abandon once and for all the things that struggling readers do and teaching teachers that that's a practice they need to engage in. That's inappropriate. We wouldn't accept that with pilots because their lives at stake. We wouldn't accept that with surgeons because their lives at stake. Why would we accept that with educators? This is about bringing honor back to our profession and taking our power back, educators. Some of you parents are also educators. And parents, you become our champions to help us take our power back. And our nation is absolutely dependent upon that. Our future.
One of the most interesting revelations that I had while doing this work, because as a parent, you figure out that your child has dyslexia and you go to the district assuming that they know something about it. And there's, at first it's hard to understand why they're resisting you. And so you think they know about this, but maybe they don't have enough money. They don't have the resources. But come to find out, they really don't know anything about it. And so they don't even know as much as you know. So after you can kind of calm down and get a little more sophisticated and educate yourself a little bit more, you realize they've never been taught this in the College of Education. And in fact, teachers are also losing out. That's because right. Colleges of Education aren't teaching them. Our children are losing because our teachers don't know how to teach reading. So parents are actually on the same team as teachers. But you start out thinking they're withholding something. And in fact, right. You can join together with them to try to make the change.
That's right. That's right. And Brett, it starts with policies. One of the strategies parents should use is find the legislators within your realm of influence who also have a student with dyslexia, because they're just as frustrated as you are. Here's the thing. When we start to shape policy, and one of the best examples I see is Ohio and the way they're doing it, they don't do it to people. They do it with people. They have created a design team for policies that include district leaders, teachers, parents, the members of the EL community. If we don't, then we end up fighting unnecessary battles when we should be fighting the same war. And so I would say that's a crucial piece of this puzzle. And then once we have legislation, the work is just beginning. So when a State Department has to roll out an initiative, the most important thing, again, is prepping the system for change, engaging stakeholders, not just in the what, but in the why, selling the problem and the opportunity for change. If we don't prep the system for change, it's like driving around without oil in your car. Eventually, you're going to get friction, and it's not going to go well. And so influencing legislators in that process to say, stay engaged. Help your state superintendent with that aspect of preparing and change management. We can't ignore change management. There need to be experts helping with that part of it, because as the State Department rolls out things, it's going to have a ripple effect on how districts roll it out. And so if we want to avoid defiant compliance, we've got to do that work well. We've got to get feedback from teachers about what a responsible rollout looks like. That's when you get deep, systemic, sustainable change. And so we can work from both ends. You can work from within your own school and district, but don't forget the big umbrella opportunities here that we can do that impact the entire state. And my hope is that the future president of this country will see this as a collective moonshot. If I were a politician, this would be my major platform, to bring people together across party lines, that this is the platform. Literacy success for all and transforming the family tree through literacy is something that everybody needs and can benefit from. And then imagine if we had the lowest incarceration rate of any country in the world. It's possible, but do we have the will for the work?
Well, that was probably the most interesting and kind of stark, because I know, and I've heard, and we've all heard in this kind of universe, that only a third of kids are proficient readers. And so you think, God, and most people don't know that. You say that, drop that at a dinner party, people,
no idea.
What are you talking about? But when you gave the statistics for the countries and their incarceration rates, it wasn't even the rates, it was in absolute numbers. It was startling. Can you share with us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So the country with the highest incarceration rate, and I can't call the number off the top of my head, but you can look this up, and I can provide that as a follow-up, is our country, a democracy, the land of the free and the home of the brave. When you think about the population density of China and India, how is it possible that we have the highest incarceration rate? There's something terribly wrong with that picture. When you look at the data that's available, which we really need better data, of the percentage of inmates who are dyslexic in our country, it's around 48%. My state has the highest incarceration rate of any state in this country, Texas. This is high stakes. If we're serious about real systems change, we have to prep systems for sustainability and be very thoughtful about this work. When we think about Senator Cassidy bringing people together for the First Step Act, an act intended to identifying inmates in prison who are dyslexic and giving them services, the first step needs to be prevention, of course. What if the First Step Act became unnecessary one day because we were identifying children early and looking for those red flags, even in pre-K, K, first grade, second grade, instead of the wait to fail model? It's also ironic that even with the First Step Act, they do not have a valid and reliable tool for identifying inmates yet. So again, the spirit of the law and the letter of the law are very different. It's a very admirable effort, and it's a bipartisan effort. But if we're serious about it, then we need valid and reliable tools to screen inmates for dyslexia. So whether we make wrong things right at the tail end while we're looking at prevention at the front end, either we're serious about this being our collective moonshot or we're not. And that means all hands on deck, every leader, and we're all leaders, influencing from the middle to make wrong things right. And fighting for this as a human rights issue for every American and really anyone in the world. There's a reason why in some countries they don't want women to become educated and literate. Literacy is truly a form of currency that gives us a place at the table. And we're better than that. We're better than that.
Absolutely. One of the things that you mentioned that I have seen, the idea, there is an idea, and I think it's very specific to education. I've not run into it before, but the idea that you were saying that people need to find the perfect thing to do before they jump in. And in engineering, in business, and science, you look at a system and there's always room for improvement because the standard, the norm is continuous improvement. So the idea that there may be something better, it might be more efficient, is just baked into the system. Why is that not the case in education?
Ooh, I wish I knew the answer to that. Oh my gosh. You know, I think part of it, Brett, is the silo effect begins at the classroom level, where teachers have worked with their, heads down. Sometimes I did it, blinders on, and not really working collaboratively to work smarter and not just harder. It's about an entrepreneurial spirit. They're entrepreneurs and they're entrepreneurs. So if student outcomes are our measure of success, then entrepreneurial schools come together to work like this, right? It's the same thing at the district level. The silo effect is killing us in central office. And so there's this initiative overload that presses down on principals and teachers because special ed's doing their thing here, curriculum instruction is doing their thing here, the people serving the leaders in the district are doing, and everybody's saying this is a priority. EL department, this is a priority. If everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority. So what should we be focused on collectively so all arrows are pointing in the same direction so we can get some real movement and change? It's literacy. It affects all of these areas. And if we get literacy right, then we can get other things right too, like math. If I'm a math teacher and my students are functionally illiterate, they don't have access to reading a story problem. Science, STEAM and STEM. I can't access STEAM and STEM if I'm functionally illiterate. It's so logical. So I believe, Brett, it's the silo effect. And we can see that continuing on up to state departments. Working in silos, not really collaborating with districts and bringing them to the table. So we had this cross-purpose team a design team planning the work and then working the plan, not waiting for perfection. I think about the world of technology and coding, and there's all of this collaboration going on because there's a vision for something bigger than any of the folks working in different lanes. It's creating this super highway of focus. So we're not, this dirt path, all these dirt paths, and we're all going down our little dirt path versus creating a super highway of change together. I think that, from my experience, is the number one barrier, is the silo effect.
That's amazing, because I find that too. When I am talking to parents, it's extraordinary to me the number of parents and parent groups. But that's really kind of what we're trying to do, is to break down the silos and to bring these people together. What we found in Ohio was, after we were successful in flipping our district to the science of reading, we helped another district and another district, now we've got 25, and we come together as a statewide coalition, and we're able to support the Ohio dyslexia legislation, the development of the dyslexia guidebook at some really critical junctures, but bringing these groups together, it's extraordinary, the power, and I see that over and over and over.
There's a saying my dad taught me: two cannot walk together unless they be in agreement. So when you find those people who are in agreement for what's best for kids, who are not ego-driven, because that's the other barrier. It's adult egos, Brett. It's adult issues that have nothing to do with what's best for children. Leave those fundamentalists behind unless you can influence them to think it's their idea to do the right thing. That's the chestnut checkers piece. You got to figure out who you're dealing with. And as Maya Angelou said, when people show you who they are, believe it. Mm-hmm. Believe it. That ability, and I want to give a shout out to my amazing sister, Dr. Maria Murray, mm-hmm. in the Reading League. I am a blessed ally of Maria Murray in the Reading League. She is all about influencing from the middle. People like the Maria Murrays. If you don't know about the Reading League, find out about them in the Defining Guide and the Defining Movement. That is what this is all about. I think about Dr. Elsa Cardenas-Hagen and Linda Diamond and Tim Odegaard and Julie Washington, and I think about the International Dyslexia Association and Sanja Banks. These are the villagers who want to come together to do the right thing. Those are the people that I ally myself with, because it's not about them, it's about the children. So that's where our power is. It's collective impact. And then we can go on to the greater things. Like there are barriers to learning that go beyond strong classroom instruction, trauma, hunger. Our children need to get those foundational things right so that we can go on to collective impact to the next level, and breaking down the silos so that we can organize resources to do that work. Our common enemy is poverty. That sucks the joy out of the mind, body, and spirit of children and adults. That is our common enemy. Let's not forget who our real enemy is, because at times we're looking at the wrong person and thinking they're the enemy, and they're not. That's my enemy.
It's interesting. I testified at a state school board meeting, and one of the school board members was telling us about the trauma that the children were bringing with them to school, and saying that, in effect, that was preventing them from learning. Mm-hmm. And we were successful in helping her understand that because the school was not following any evidence-based reading instruction. They were actually creating trauma for children in school. So that's an interesting conversation as well.
So powerful. That's so powerful. Having navigated an urban environment where I didn't always feel safe and there were many challenges, Brett, I wouldn't be on this call with you had I not had teachers doing the right work by me. And so we can't use that as an excuse not to give the children what they need. It is their ticket from the land of not enough to the land of promise. And I'm so proud of you all for making the case in that way, because the soft classism of low expectations is the last thing our kids need. And that's not the intention at times. It's just, oh, those poor children. Hey, I'll take you to children in high poverty communities, and I'll show you children not only performing proficiently, but the critical mass of children shifting to performing at advanced levels. What can a kid like that do performing at advanced levels in the world? They're huge possibilities.
Kareem Weaver, I was listening to one of his things, and he was talking about his educational hero, and he talked about Marva Collins.
Yes,
and
mine too.
Oh my God!
Mine too.
About, the not expecting anything. I mean, the 60 Minutes was extraordinary. These children were told that they were just
dumb.
Worse, way worse.
Uneducable. Yes.
And she taught them how to read and to decode, but she also loved them and had high expectation. They were reading Shakespeare in 4th grade.
Literacy Now is a podcast designed specifically for parents in our effort to ensure every child learns to read. Parents deserve a seat at the table, and we bring their voices to the fore. We invite you to join the Parents for Reading Justice community on all of our socials, and make sure to visit our website to watch our documentary and to take our masterclass. All of our content is free of charge because every child deserves to learn to read. This episode was brought to you by parentsforreadingjustice.org, produced by Brett Tingley and Keita Mascaro.